Donald Trump has just announced major tariffs on almost every single country in the world. The news is currently dominated by talk of tariffs, trade wars, trade deficits, and trade balances. But what do all of these words mean? Well, today I am going to define and explain and give examples for over 20 tariff-related vocabularies. This is designed for English learners and non-native English speakers who want to understand and talk about this complicated topic. If you're interested, I have a full podcast episode titled "What is a Tariff?" Let's get started. Tariff. Tariff. A tariff is a tax that a government places on imported or sometimes exported goods. Governments do this to raise revenue or to protect local businesses. For example, the US government imposed a tariff on Chinese electronics to make American-made products more competitive. Import. Import. To import means to bring goods into a country for sale. This can be a verb or a noun referring to the things that are brought in. For example, Japan imports large amounts of oil because it doesn't produce enough domestically. Export. Export. The opposite of import is export. This means sending goods, sending products, sending things out of a country for sale. For example, Germany exports cars all over the world, including to the United States and China. Duty. Duty. A duty is another word for a tax on imported or exported goods. It's similar to a tariff, but often used in everyday business conversations. When you buy something online from another country, you often have to pay the duties. When my mum sends me something from the UK to Japan, occasionally I need to pay duties. For example, travelers must pay customs duty on expensive items they bring into a country. Quota. Quota. A quota is a government limit on how much of a product can be imported or exported. Again, this is to protect local industries and protect the economy. A country may have a quota for milk. You can only import a certain amount of milk to protect dairy farmers. For example, the US set a quota on imported steel to protect American manufacturers. Subsidy. Subsidy. A subsidy is when the government gives money to a local business or industry to help them compete with foreign companies. Most countries give subsidies or subsidize industries. For example, the European Union provides subsidies to farmers so they can produce food at lower prices. Trade barrier. Trade barrier. A trade barrier is anything that makes international trade more difficult. This could be tariffs and duties, like I just explained. It could be quotas, or it could be regulations or currency changes. For example, strict health regulations act as a trade barrier for foreign food companies entering the market. Free trade. Free trade. Free trade is a term I'm sure you've all heard a lot before. Free trade is when countries agree to remove tariffs and quotas, allowing goods and products to move freely across borders. For example, the European Union promotes free trade among its member countries. This means there's no tariffs on goods between France and Germany. Embargo. Embargo. An embargo is when a government completely bans trade with another country. For example, the United States has had a trade embargo against Cuba for decades. Protectionism. Protectionism. Protectionism is an economic ideology. It refers to policies that restrict imports to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. Right now, the United States is in a period of protectionism. For example, some politicians support protectionism to protect local jobs, while others prefer free trade. Balance of trade. Balance of trade. The balance of trade is the difference between a country's exports and imports. How much do you send and sell out of your country, and how much do you buy or bring in or import into your country? The difference is the balance of trade. For example, China has a positive balance of trade because it exports more than it imports. Trade deficit. Trade deficit. A trade deficit happens when a country imports more than it exports. For example, the US has a trade deficit with China because it buys more Chinese goods than it sells to China. Trade surplus. Trade surplus. The opposite of a trade deficit is a trade surplus. This is when a country exports more than it imports. It sends away more than it brings into the country. For example, Germany has a trade surplus because it exports more cars and machinery than it imports. Most favored nation, or MFN. If a country has most favored nation status, it gets the best trade terms. It gets the lowest tariffs possible. It gets no quotas. For example, India has MFN status with Japan, so its exports face fewer restrictions. Dumping. Dumping. Dumping is when a company sells goods in another country at a much lower price, and they do this to eliminate competition. If the price of rice in a country is at $10 per kilogram, and someone decides to sell rice for $1 a kilogram, it will destroy the other country's industry and it will eliminate all of their competition. And in the future, they can raise their prices to a profitable level again. For example, the government imposed tariffs on foreign steel to prevent dumping and protect local producers. Ad valorem tariff. Ad valorem tariff. Now let's talk a little bit about different types of tariff. An ad valorem tariff is a tax based on a percentage of the product's value. So this could be 5%, 10%, 50%, 100%. For example, a 10% ad valorem tariff on smartphones means a $1,000 phone will have a $100 tax. Specific tariff. Specific tariff. Unlike an ad valorem tariff, which is based on percentages, a specific tariff is a fixed tax per unit, like $5 per kilogram of imported cheese. For example, the government added a specific tariff of $2 per bottle on imported wine. Tariff jumping. Tariff jumping. Tariff jumping happens when a foreign company moves production to another country to avoid tariffs. This is what Donald Trump and the US government wants to happen. They want companies to tariff jump. They want companies from Japan, from Taiwan, from China, from Europe to move their production to the USA to avoid these high tariffs. This happened in Brazil in the past, where the Brazilian government had very high tariffs on cars, and so lots of Japanese car companies and European car companies started making cars in Brazil. Non-Tariff Barrier. Non-Tariff Barrier, or an NTB. A non-tariff barrier is a trade restriction that is not a tariff. It could be something like a product safety rule or a labeling law. There are lots of rules in Europe, for example, that stop food from the USA being sold in Europe because it doesn't meet safety or labeling or health legislation. Inside this non-tariff barrier, Donald Trump has actually included sales taxes or value-added taxes. These are normally not considered non-tariff barriers because they are applied to everyone, imported goods or domestically made goods. But in Trump's calculations, non-tariff barriers include VAT. For example, strict food safety regulations are a non-tariff barrier that makes it harder for foreign companies to sell products in the US. Retaliatory tariff. Retaliatory tariff. A retaliatory tariff is a tax imposed in response to another country's tariffs. It's a retaliation. For example, China imposed a retaliatory tariff on American soybeans after the US increased tariffs on Chinese goods. Smoot-Hawley. Smoot-Hawley. You'll hear this term, Smoot-Hawley, talked about a lot when comparing Trump's tariffs in 2025 with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the 1930s. Smoot-Hawley was a US law from 1930 that raised tariffs and actually worsened the Great Depression. For example, many economists blame the Smoot-Hawley tariff for making the global economy worse in the 1930s. Infant industry protection. Infant industry protection. Governments use infant industry protection to help new businesses compete against foreign companies. This is one of the good uses of tariffs. If you are a country trying to develop a new industry, you need to protect that industry against the more developed foreign companies. Think about it like raising a child. If you have a child, you don't just send them into the workforce straight away. You send them to school, you educate them first. And this is what an infant industry protection idea is about. Protect your industry through tariffs, make the prices of foreign goods more expensive until your industry can compete against other markets around the world. For example, developing countries use infant industry protection to support local car manufacturers. That's all for today. If you want to sound more natural when discussing global trade, all of these words will help. Also, when you're watching the news, reading articles, or just chatting with your friends in English about trade and about tariffs and about politics at the moment, the global political economy, hopefully some of these words will come in useful. Hopefully some of these words can be added into your vocabulary. Let me know in the comments, does your country use tariffs or have free trade agreements? And has your country just been tariffed by the USA? I'm from the UK and we've just been hit by a 10% flat tariff. And I live in Japan, which is now, I think, a 24% tariff. These are going to have major consequences on the global economy. Subscribe, like, and share this video. Check out the Thinking in English podcast if you want more content. And I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.